Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we unravel what everyone's talking about.
And lately, if you've been anywhere near political Twitter or TikTok, really, there's one name that seems to keep sparking debate. A real lightning rod.
You're talking about Zohran Mamdani.
Exactly. Zohran Mamdani. He's become this focal point for, well, all sorts of discussions about ideology, activism, and how politics works online now.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking through the materials we gathered, reports from Albany, pieces in the New York Times, even global takes from The Guardian, it's clear he's not just like a state assemblyman from New York.
Not at all.
He's really emerging as maybe a key figure in the progressive movement today, and definitely someone stirring up these intense online arguments.
That really hits the nail on the head. He kind of represents this this new kind of political influence. It's not built up over decades in the party system.
Right.
It's built on, well, immediate digital impact and often a very direct, sort of uncompromising moral stance. He's a fascinating case study for how political power gets amplified and, honestly, redefined today.
So for you listening, our goal today is pretty straightforward. We want to help you quickly get a handle on who Mamdani is, look at the specific moment that really pushed him into the national, maybe even global spotlight, and then really dig into what his sudden, very visible popularity tells us about the shifts happening in American politics, especially around generations and ideology. It's where, local fights over things like rent control in Queens suddenly intersect with global activism and, well, digital fame.
It's quite the mix. And to understand it, we really have to start with the basics, right? Lay the foundation. Who is he politically? Where does he come from? What shapes his thinking?
Okay, let's get into that crucial background then.
Yeah.
All right, so fundamentally, Zohran Mamdani identifies as a Democratic Socialist.
Yes.
And he holds office as a member of the New York State Assembly.
That's right. And where he serves is really important here. Astoria, Queens.
Okay.
Astoria is, incredibly diverse, culturally, economically, just about every way you can measure it. But crucially, it's also facing really intense gentrification pressures right now.
Ah, okay. So that makes it a real hotbed for housing issues.
Exactly. It's ground zero for debates about rent, displacement, development. So it makes perfect sense that housing justice is absolutely central to his politics.
And his election itself back in 2020, that was pretty significant, wasn't it? It wasn't just another Democrat winning.
No, not at all. It was seen as a really early, potent win for the progressive wing, specifically the Democratic Socialists within New York. He actually unseated a long-term incumbent.
Wow.
Which, showed there was a real appetite, at least in that district, for a more left-leaning, maybe anti-establishment kind of agenda.
And his work since then reflects that.
Definitely. His advocacy is very focused. It's rooted in economic and social justice issues. The sources point to, 4 main areas he consistently hits on. First 2 are very local, but also structural housing justice. That's his big one, and strong tenant protections.
Right.
Then there's the call for more progressive taxation systems.
Makes sense.
But the 4th one, and this is where he often gets national attention, is his very vocal support for Palestinian rights.
Ah, so that immediately connects his state-level role to these huge international foreign policy discussions.
Precisely. He doesn't seem to see a hard line between local and global justice issues.
Which kind of leads into understanding his style.
Right.
And the scale of his politics. Why does he talk about, say, rent caps in Queens using this global framework? We need to look at his personal background for that, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. His personal context is, well, it's really key to understanding that global perspective you hear in his speeches.
So what is that background?
Well, it's pretty unique for a U.S. state legislator. He was actually born in Uganda, though he was raised mostly in the U.S.
Right.
But the really defining part is his parentage. His father is Mahmoud Mamdani, the academic, a towering figure in post-colonial studies. And his mother is the filmmaker Mira Nair.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a combination. Mahmoud Mamdani's critical analysis of power structures, post-colonialism, and Mira Nair's narrative power, her global filmmaking perspective.
It's an incredible intellectual and cultural inheritance. You've got this deep systemic critique of power from his father's work, side by side with the storytelling, the cultural impact from his mother's.
So how does that manifest in his approach to being an assemblyman in Queens?
Well, it seems to create a political outlook that's just naturally inclined to view justice and equity through a systemic global lens. He's sort of intellectually wired, you could say, not to see problems as isolated incidents.
Okay.
So instead of just thinking, how do we tweak the rent regulations in Astoria, his framework immediately goes bigger. It questions the very foundations of, property ownership, economic power structures. It's always larger than just the district lines.
So when he talks about those local issues, you mentioned rent control, maybe subway fares too. He's not just arguing for like small policy adjustments.
Right.
He's drawing direct lines from those everyday problems to these huge systemic critiques. Capitalism, colonialism, it shifts the whole debate. It's not just how do we fund the subway, but why are public goods underfunded in a system that prioritizes profit?
Exactly. And you can see why that resonates so strongly with especially younger generations who feel like economic pressure, that precarity so acutely.
Right.
They often see these problems not as accidents, but as like predictable outcomes of systems they feel didn't benefit them. Mamdani gives them a language, often a sophisticated academic language, to connect their frustration, maybe not being able to afford rent in Astoria, to these big historical and global forces. That validation, it's incredibly powerful.
Okay, so that systemic view is always there. But then there was a specific event, wasn't there? The moment that took him from being, a notable local figure to this viral, highly debated national name, The Thing, in October 2025.
Yes, that was the flashpoint, the big inflection point. He was speaking at a rally, gave this very fiery, apparently unscripted speech.
Okay.
He was condemning U.S. foreign policy. But the part that really caught fire, and crucially spoke directly to his constituents' anxieties, was when he condemned the role of corporate landlords and big finance in the housing market. He even named specific global investment firms operating right there in Queens.
And this is where the platform matters so much, right? The clip gets out there.
Instantly. The context was already charged, the message was blunt, and a short clip just exploded on TikTok and Twitter.
Right.
It wasn't just news outlets reporting on it. It was users clipping it, remixing it, adding music, sharing it thousands and thousands of times. They became like a piece of online culture itself.
And there was one line specifically that just took off, the one that ended up in all those edits.
Yes, that's what really cemented his national visibility. It was everywhere. The quote was, "Housing is a human right, not a financial instrument."
Okay, let's just pause on that quote for a second. It's really effective political communication for the internet age, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Why does it work so well? It's short, 8 words.
Mm-hmm.
It's morally absolute. There's no gray area. It forces you to react, to pick a side almost.
Right. It presents this clear moral imperative.
And it takes this incredibly complex issue, the whole financialization of housing, decades of policy debate, and boils it down to a simple, powerful, totally shareable idea. It's perfectly designed for a viral clip.
Yeah, you contrast that with typical legislative language, which is all about clauses and subsections and careful definitions. Mamdani just cuts through all that with moral certainty.
And the reaction was immediate and polarized.
Oh, intensely polarized, instantly.
Mm-hmm.
On one side, you had conservative outlets, centrist commentators immediately jumping on it as, radical rhetoric, detached from reality, utopian. And just as quickly, on the other side, progressives are basically saying, see, this is the clarity we need. This is the future. He was immediately being talked about as, like, the next key figure alongside others in the squad.
That intense split reaction is almost like the proof it worked, digitally speaking. It hit a nerve far beyond Queens.
Exactly. It was the digital litmus test. And it's no surprise that major publications, The Guardian, Vox, The New York Times, they all jumped in pretty quickly, not just reporting the event, but analyzing his influence, his appeal, specifically to Gen Z and millennials.
So it signaled this wasn't just a fleeting internet moment. It was seen as something bigger, potentially a sign of a real political and generational shift underway.
Precisely. Hashtag to internet reactions and polarization.
The discourse.
So the mainstream press picked it up, but the really raw ideological battleground, place where his political identity is constantly being debated and defined, that seems to be happening mostly on social media, right? Like Reddit threads, X arguments. Oh, absolutely. That's where the core debate really crystallizes. And it boils down to this central question, which seems to come up again and again for politicians who gain prominence online, like Mamdani does.
Which is?
Is this kind of politics, the fiery speeches, the viral moments, the strong moral stances, is it genuinely practical for actually governing, for getting laws passed in Albany? Or is it mainly performative activism, more about building a profile and shifting the conversation than about legislative results?
And it's fascinating how the answer seems completely dependent on where you already stand politically.
Pretty much, yeah. For his progressive supporters, the passion, the reach, the moral clarity, those are the assets. That's why he's effective. He's seen as this necessary voice challenging a broken system.
Right. The performance is part of the point.
Exactly. But for critics, especially more moderate or establishment figures, that same passion and virality look like distractions. They see it as, maybe a substitute for the slow, difficult, compromising work needed to actually draft and pass legislation. It's this tension between the movement and the governing.
Let's look at the progressive support first. They definitely see him as part of a lineage, right? A narrative of succession. You mentioned comparisons to the Squad.
Yes, consistently. He's often mentioned in the same breath as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, remember, also pulled off a major incumbent defeat in Queens and Rashida Tlaib. That framing gives him instant credibility within that movement.
So he fits into this idea of a new wave of leadership.
Right. And supporters really value what they see as his specific style. It's this blend of unwavering moral clarity combined with a really savvy social media fluency.
He gets the medium.
He totally gets the medium. He doesn't just understand the policy points of the left. He knows exactly how to package those points into, say, a 15-second clip that bypasses traditional media and just flies on its own.
And that fluency is key to his appeal with younger demographics, isn't it? Gen Z, millennials.
Absolutely critical. His speeches trend heavily on platforms like TikTok. That makes him instantly relevant and familiar to those audiences in a way that, frankly, many older politicians just aren't.
What is it about the tone they connect with?
It's direct. It's often emotional, sometimes confrontational. It feels authentic, maybe. It's a stark contrast to this sort of cautious, poll-tested, carefully managed messaging you often get from more established figures.
And it sounds like he's speaking their language about their experiences.
I think that's a big part of it. He's articulating the pressures of student debt, stagnant wages, the feeling of maybe permanent economic insecurity that defines life for a lot of younger voters. When he links something like rent control to, colonialism, he's validating their sense that the system itself feels fundamentally unfair. Not just like it needs minor repairs.
Okay, but when you gain that kind of online fame and ideological clarity, you inevitably attract a strong pushback. What are the main arguments coming from the other side, from conservatives, maybe centrists, about his approach?
The main criticism revolves around labeling his rhetoric as radical or impractical. The core worry you hear, especially from people focused on the actual process of governing in Albany, is that this kind of uncompromising activism, it risks alienating two groups they see as essential for making policy progress.
Which are?
Moderate voters and perhaps more significantly, business interests or the more centrist parts of the Democratic Party itself.
So the argument isn't necessarily that his goals are bad, like who doesn't want affordable housing? It's that his methods, his rhetoric, make achieving those goals harder, maybe impossible.
That's the crux of it, yeah. The critique is that he burns bridges before the negotiation even starts. They'd argue he prioritizes ideological purity, or maybe just signaling that purity to his base over the pragmatic compromises needed to actually pass bills.
So governance requires coalition building, give and take.
Right. And if you start every conversation by saying the entire system is illegitimate or based on capitalist exploitation, well, the argument goes you pretty much kill any chance of finding common ground or getting buy-in from people who don't already agree with you. They see him as more focused on changing the narrative than changing the law.
And because all this plays out online, these complex identities get simplified, right? Turned into memes, labels.
Yeah, instantly. And this is where it gets really reductive, but also really effective in shaping how people see him. Memes, viral edits, they solidify his image for better or worse, depending on your view.
What kind of labels are we talking about?
Well, you see strong, sometimes really inflammatory comparisons. On one end, you might see comparisons to Che Guevara. For supporters, that signals revolutionary spirit. For detractors, it signals danger, extremism.
Okay.
And then there's the label that just perfectly captures his political context and style. The AOC of Queens.
Right. That's immediate shorthand. It tells you ideology, geography, relationship to the establishment, anti-incumbent strategy, social media use, all in 4 words.
Exactly. It's incredibly potent digital branding. But, it also comes with baggage. It potentially locks him into the narrative already set by AOC. He's not just Zohran Mamdani anymore. He's part of this larger, often embattled progressive brand.
Which highlights that point again. The online platforms aren't just reporting on politics anymore. They're actively shaping the political identities we end up talking about.
That's the crucial distinction, I think. The performance can almost become the policy impact because it dictates the terms of the whole debate. #tag3, analysis and takeaway, the broader political shift. So if we zoom out from Mamdani himself and think about what his rise represents, it really does seem to signal a significant shift in how political power is built and used in the U.S. now. It's moving away somewhat from total reliance on those traditional traditional structures, local party endorsements, big corporate donors.
Right. And analysts are starting to call this movement-based politics, which sounds distinct from the old party-based or maybe interest group models. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, this kind of movement-based politics seems to have three core features, and Mamdani really embodies all of them. First, it tends to be fundamentally community-driven. It bubbles up from grassroots concerns, housing, climate, whatever, not necessarily from DC think tanks.
Okay.
Second, it's aggressively digitally amplified. The message spreads virally, often bypassing traditional media gatekeepers entirely. An editor at the local paper might not matter as much as a TikTok influencer.
Right.
And third, and this is key strategically, it's often explicitly anti-establishment. Its rhetoric, its goals, they often aim to challenge or even overturn the existing system, not just tweak it.
And that anti-establishment piece is where the friction comes in. Right. That tension we talked about. His success really throws into sharp relief this growing clash between those progressive ideals which demand big structural change, often uncompromisingly, and what you might call institutional pragmatism. The reality of needing to work within the existing rules, make deals, pass something in places like Albany or Congress.
Exactly. The institution often demands incrementalism, consensus, managing the status quo. The movement demands radical, immediate change. It's a fundamental tension. But having a figure like Mamdani, who is so visible, forces those traditional institutions to actually confront and respond to these digitally charged, community-based demands, even if they dislike the rhetoric intensely.
So the virality isn't just about making him famous. It's a tool to force the establishment's hand, to push for actual structural change by creating this undeniable public pressure.
I think that's a core part of the strategy. Yes, that's the potential power of this new model. Mamdani seems to use media virality not just to win his seat or get attention for a bill, but specifically to try and shift the entire frame of the debate towards structural reform. Well, when his speeches about housing go viral, the national conversation, at least online, shifts. It moves from just talking about, say, rental assistance programs managing the crisis to asking why housing became a speculative asset in the first place. That's a structural question that challenges the whole economic setup. Virality becomes this incredibly potent tool for agenda setting on a mass scale.
And that gives him leverage, doesn't it? If you have millions of people watching and sharing your statement that housing is a human right, you have a kind of public mandate, a shield almost, that you wouldn't get just by quietly negotiating behind closed doors in the assembly.
That's right. He can afford to be more uncompromising, perhaps, because his political power derives significantly from that digital base, not solely from pleasing the party leadership or big donors.
And you mentioned this isn't just a U.S. thing. This model is global.
Increasingly, yes. Analysts are pointing out that Mamdani fits into this broader global pattern, a resurgence of young, often highly idealistic politicians who are using these exact same tactics.
Like what?
Uncompromising moral language, heavy reliance on digital platforms to bypass old media, tapping into anti-establishment feelings. You see similar figures emerging in various democracies around the world. It connects what's happening with an assemblyman in Queens to this larger international trend. It shows how these progressive ideas and the digital methods used to spread them can travel pretty seamlessly across borders now. A systemic critique packaged well online can resonate from Astoria to Athens.
Which leads us to the big takeaway, really. What does his influence ultimately mean?
I think it signifies the arrival, or at least the growing power, of politicians who build and sustain their influence, not primarily through those traditional routes, years of party work, cultivating donors, getting newspaper endorsements, but through these fast, potent, digital, often anti-establishment platforms.
He's like a politician built for the internet age.
Yeah, exactly. An age where emotional connection, moral clarity, and the ability to go viral can sometimes outweigh, or at least powerfully supplement, deep policy expertise or mastery of legislative procedure. It's a fundamental shift in where political power comes from, and it's forcing everyone in the traditional political world to figure out how to deal with the speed and the intensity of these digital movements.
And it raises a huge question for anyone thinking about running for office in the future, whatever their politics are, doesn't it? If you can't speak this digital language, if you can't boil down your message into something compelling and shareable and morally urgent, can you still generate the kind of energy needed to drive real change, even if you're the most brilliant negotiator in the room?
It's a really challenging new landscape for politicians, especially incumbents, to navigate. Realizing your voting record might suddenly matter less than your TikTok presence. #outro.
Looking at this whole story of Zohran Mamdani, it really is such a clear example of how digital culture now completely shapes our political figures. It can take someone who might have been mostly known locally and turn them into a national, even global point of conversation almost overnight.
Yeah, it's the sheer speed and the nature of that amplification that's so different. Political impact isn't just measured in votes or bills anymore. It's also measured in reach, in reactions, in crafting these incredibly concise, memorable, moral arguments that just travel instantly.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given the undeniable power of virality we see with figures like Mamdani, do you think future political success will lean more heavily on being fluent in social media, crafting those emotional speeches that hit just right, compared to the traditional skills of legislative bargaining and finding bipartisan compromise? Which skill set do you think will really hold more weight in the halls of power, say, 10 years from now?
Definitely something to think about next time you're scrolling through your feed.
Next time, we'll be taking a look at a different kind of hype cycle. The Starbucks Bear Cup, when branding, fandom, and consumer hype collide.
Looking forward to that one. We'll see you then.
Thanks so much for joining us for this discussion today.